The final presidential debate of 2020, the last best chance for the nominees to make their cases directly to the American people. And tonight they debated the response to the pandemic ravaging our nation.
We can't close up our nation. We have to open our school, and we can't close up our nation, or you're not going to have a nation.
This is the same fellow who told you this is going to end by Easter last time. This is the same fellow who told you that, don't worry, we're going to end this by the summer. We're about to go into a dark winter.
They battled over health care in America.
I'd like to terminate Obamacare, come up with a brand new, beautiful health care.
He keeps talking about it. He hasn't done a thing for anybody on health care.
And they shared their views on race.
Abraham Lincoln here is one of the most racist presidents we've had in modern history. He pours fuel on every single racist fire.
I am the least racist person. I can't even see the audience because it's so dark.
But how effectively did they make those cases? We'll ask our panel of Southern California voters. Decision 2020. What matters here? What matters now?
Good evening. My name is Amrit Singh, and this election season has felt endless. We all can admit that. But tonight we got proof that it is, in fact, drawing to a close. This was the final presidential debate of 2020, and it brought a new tone and some very different takes on the issues facing our nation. Tonight we heard about those issues directly from the candidates, but we also want to make sure we're hearing directly from voters like you. So after each debate this season, we've invited a panel of voters to share their thoughts right here on this show. We've talked to black voters, female voters, millennials, and tonight we're talking to essential workers from across the political spectrum, because while demographics are important in politics, so is understanding that no demographic is a monolith. There is diversity within the demo. So with that said, let's get to know tonight's panel. Up first, we have Dr. Jerry Abraham. He's a 36-year-old and he lives in downtown Los Angeles. Dr. Jerry is a family physician and epidemiologist. His top concerns are the COVID-19 response, along with access to health care, the economic recovery, and racial justice. And you may recognize him as one of our undecided voters from the primary season, but he's decided to vote for Joe Biden. Next, we have Richard Joaquin, who is a 53-year-old law enforcement officer who lives in Corona. Richard's top issues are the economy, the Supreme Court, and the defund the police movement. Rich is planning to cast his vote for President Donald Trump. And Benin Lemus lives in Los Angeles and works as a teacher and librarian. She is 47 years old, and her top issues are health care, the economy, and social justice. Benin plans to vote for former VP Biden. And then we have Annadelle Murray, who is a retired police officer living in U-Haul. She is 47 years old, and she is most concerned about the civil unrest in the streets, along with the Supreme Court and securing the border. Annadelle is voting for President Trump. So we're going to begin tonight's conversation with a conversation about the issue affecting every one of us, and that is COVID-19. And tonight the candidates sketched out different perceptions of the present and future of this pandemic.
There's a spike. There was a spike in Florida, and it's now gone. There was a very big spike in Texas. It's now gone. There was a very big spike in Arizona. It's now gone. And there are some spikes and surges in other places. They will soon be gone. We have a vaccine that's coming. It's ready. It's going to be announced within weeks, and it's going to be delivered. We have Operation Warp Speed, which is the military is going to distribute the vaccine.
This is the same fellow who told you this is going to end by Easter last time. This is the same fellow who told you that, don't worry, we're going to end this by the summer. We're about to go into a dark winter, and he has no clear plan, and there's no prospect that there's going to be a vaccine available for the majority of the American people before the middle of next year.
This is a personal issue for all of us, and having an understanding of what's happening now is essential to mounting a successful response moving forward. So with that, I want to turn to our voters, and thank you all so much for being with us tonight. It's wonderful to have your voices here. Annadelle, I'm going to begin with you, and like I said, this is something that we all experience personally. For you, when you and I were speaking earlier, you were telling me about your husband who's on the streets as an undercover officer, and the pandemic is something that he is ultimately concerned about. So when you heard these two candidates offer their perceptions of what is happening now and what is happening in the future with this pandemic, whose sense made more sense to you?
Well, thank you for having me. I want to, when I hear Biden speak about we're entering a dark winter and he doesn't see us getting out of this until 2022, that is very troubling to me, to think that 99% of the people are surviving from the coronavirus. And with the therapeutics and the vaccines going to be released shortly, I have to believe that President Trump is going to get us out of the situation that we're facing right now with the virus. There's many people that are surviving this virus, and we can open up safely.
Thank you, Annadelle. It is a matter of perception, ultimately. Dr. Jerry, I'm going to come to you next. The famous undecided Dr. Jerry is decided now. Thank you for being with us. Now, your firsthand response of this as a doctor is relevant, I think, to this. And so when you heard these two candidates talk about this pandemic, President Trump saying it's going away, the vaccine is coming soon, Biden saying something very different. What's been your experience, and which response do you think makes more sense?
Yeah, I'm definitely dealing with this every day in the hospital and in the clinic. We have staff, we have patients that have COVID. There's definitely a role for vaccine development. I don't believe it's weeks. It may be months before we can have that widely distributed. I think treatments are still being kind of developed and employed, and that's important too. And I think that we're definitely, as Biden hints, in the early phase of a second wave. So there's lots of pieces to this puzzle. I'm sad to not see Fauci or Birx or other scientists or physicians leading our strategy, and I think that's part of the flaw of the way the administration has handled this. I don't like the way that public health institutions have kind of been eroded through this process.
It is an institutional response, ultimately. And Rich, I'm going to come to you that when we think about the response from all of our institutions and from this administration, and we can talk about the management of the pandemic to date on this point. You told me ultimately that President Trump couldn't bear the blame for the pandemic, which I think everyone can agree with, that this is something that sort of happened to us on a certain level. But of course, there's also the conversation about the response up until now. There was apparently a playbook that the Obama-Biden administration claims to have left for President Trump. What do you think about the way that the administration has handled this response, and how did President Trump speak to that tonight?
Good evening, Amrit. Thank you for having me today. President Trump has had a lot thrown at him, and he's being blamed for coronavirus. He couldn't have done, let me get this straight. Whoever the president would have been, it doesn't matter who the president would have been. These are very unusual times. So when he first shut down the travel from China, he was attacked for it. Nancy Pelosi was in Chinatown without a mask. Hey, come to Chinatown, come to Chinatown. The medical field has done a 180. They were telling people, you don't have to wear a mask, don't wear a mask, it does not work. And now we're told that the mask does work. So the medical field has done a complete 180 on that topic.
Thank you for that, Rich. Benina, I want to come to you as a school teacher. Former VP Biden was talking about reopening the schools. Both the candidates were. For President Trump, he was talking about his own son, Barron, having tested positive and then not having it, claiming, ultimately that maybe young people have better immune systems. You are dealing with young people all the time in school, and we're talking a lot about what it takes to open schools. Whose plan ultimately makes sense for you as a teacher and for your students?
Without a doubt, Vice President Biden's plan, because I think one is that he understands science, he believes in science, and what he's proposing is what the doctors have already said we need to do first. We need to do social distancing, we need to wear masks, we need to wash our hands, and then we need to let the therapeutics and the vaccine make its way through. Nobody wants to be back at work more than I do. I miss my students, I miss the library, I miss my colleagues, I miss the parents. But the reality is that students do get sick, teachers will get sick, and it's a small price to pay if we do what we need to do now, and then in 5, 6, 7 months, we can probably come back. But we need to trust the science. And that's what I want students to understand too, is that we need to trust what we're being told by the professionals.
Ultimately, we do want trust in the people that are guiding our response. There's no doubt about that. And connected to the coronavirus pandemic, of course, is the way they were treating us on an individual level. And Trump and Biden displayed those differences on health care. The president ripped Obamacare and talked about creating something better, while the vice president defended Obamacare and talked about something that he called Biden care.
Through the legislature, I terminated the individual mandate. That is the worst part of Obamacare, as we call it. The individual mandate, where you have to pay a fortune for the privilege of not having to pay for bad health insurance. I terminated. It's gone.
What I'm going to do is pass Obamacare with a public option. will become Biden care. The public option is an option that says that if you, in fact, do not have the wherewithal if you qualify for Medicaid and you do not have the wherewithal in your state to get Medicaid, you automatically are enrolled, providing competition for insurance companies.
So VP Biden calling it Biden care. We'll have to see how his friend Barack feels about that rebrand. Jerry, I want to come to you. You have the experience with the Affordable Care Act firsthand. You told me that you thought that President Trump ultimately wanted to repeal on some level Obamacare and essentially institute something very similar and just call it Trump care. Give me a realistic assessment, though, as a doctor. How do you feel the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, whatever you want to call it, is really doing?
Well, I think several important issues came up tonight. I think that the individual mandate is still an issue that is critical. Everyone in this country needs access and coverage when it comes to health care. There are a couple of other issues that are tied in there. I would say that, Trump's definitely trying to repackage what Obama did and then to use the Biden care and dismantle it and then represent it as Trump care.
Right.
I think also the debate they had over pre-existing conditions is critical. We can't afford to have patients that have that have pre-existing conditions lose access to their doctors, their healthcare workers, their healthcare.
Right. Well, Dr. Jerry, another thing that we heard was this sort of conversation where President Trump was pointing at VP Biden. Rich, I'm going to come to you on this. And he was saying, this man is going to socialize your medicine. And this is a sort of a larger conversation about perhaps, at least the Republicans seem to suggest, that VP Biden is a sort of Trojan horse and that he will be radicalized or he is a proxy for more radical agents, though he obviously runs as a moderate and a centrist. And tonight he said, you're not running against Bernie Sanders, you're running against me. I will not socialize your medicine. How do you feel about that? Do you think that he is susceptible to more leftist and progressive elements in his party?
I believe so. The last thing we need is socialized medicine. That we do not need that. Socialism, this is a capitalist country. This is the United States of America. The last thing we need is a socialist program, another government-run program. I am not a fan of that. Again, in Karl Marx's book, Step 5 of the 6 Steps of Communism is socialism. So I am not a big fan of socialized government-run medicine.
We're talking about socialism. Benin, the person that you supported in the primary was much more like a socialist than VP Biden. I think ultimately that was Bernie Sanders and also Elizabeth Warren, and we spoke about that. So when you hear this sort of conversation that Joe Biden is a proxy for socialism, do you, as a fan of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, do you buy that?
No, not at all. I think that Vice President Biden will probably be fairly moderate. I also think that people need a real education about what socialism is. And we have many aspects of socialism in our society: the public school system, mandated car insurance, retirement, Social Security. We have a lot of systems, Medicare, Medi-Cal. We have a lot of systems in our society already that are required of us. So it's not a dirty word. I'm not afraid of it. And I think that if we all get health care, we will have a society where people are fundamentally happier. They will enjoy going to work. They will take care of their families. They'll be kind, and they'll be ready to really participate in society, because the one thing they won't have to really worry about is their general well-being. If they get sick,
right,
they know that they can get better. And I love it.
Well, Annadelle, this is a conversation about health care, the Affordable Care Act, possibly socialized medicine, though VP Biden saying that's not what he's going to be experiencing. But are we hearing something from President Trump about his plan for affordable care? And did you hear that from him tonight? Were you satisfied with that response?
I absolutely did hear that he does want to and has pushed for eliminating the individual mandates. And he also has said that people will be covered if they have pre-existing conditions. So with that being said, I believe that if the Democrats and the Republicans came together and worked together to
right, have
a better healthcare plan in place, we wouldn't have these issues. But they're
right,
creating this healthcare plan issue, and
Annadelle,
we're not going to have
Right, and I'll just jump in on that because I hear what you're saying, and it is about being bipartisan, and we do need that. The individual mandate is something that's going to be up against on the Supreme Court, the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act. We'll see what happens with that. That's coming up, and also coming up in the show, we're going to talk about race in America. It was a topic of the debate again tonight. President Trump and Biden talked about their own records and each other's records on that fact. Our panelists shared their thoughts, and that's coming up next. President Trump and former VP Biden met face-to-face for the final time before Election Day, and they battled over everything from health care to the pandemic to national security. Welcome back. My name is Amrit Singh, and we are speaking with a panel of voters from your communities about what we heard during this final debate. We've done this every week with a different group of voters. Tonight, we're talking to essential workers, a physician, law enforcement officers, and a teacher. Tonight's debate revealed stark differences on the issue of race. VP Biden addressed systemic racism in America, while President Trump talked about what he says he's accomplished for Black Americans.
Nobody has done more for the Black community than Donald Trump. And if you look, with the exception of Abraham Lincoln, possible exception, but the exception of Abraham Lincoln, nobody has done what I've done.
The fact of the matter is, there is institutional racism in America. And we have always said, we've never lived up to it, that we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women are created equal. Well, guess what? We have never, ever lived up to it, but we've always constantly been moving the needle further and further to inclusion, not exclusion. This is the first president to come along and says that's the end of that.
As 2020 has showed us, nobody has a perfect record, and that is especially true of this topic. And Benin, I'm going to come to you. When you and I were speaking earlier, one of the things that I hear from voters of color who are supporting President Trump, they say, look, VP Biden was instrumental in the 1994 crime bill. In fact, that came up tonight, too. And you told me that there's criticism essentially on both sides when it comes to this. But you also said that you have ultimately more faith in a Biden-Harris ticket on the issue of race, despite this 1994 crime bill. So if you could speak to that fact and why you think that the ticket you're supporting is the right one when it comes to race relations.
Absolutely. I think that Vice President Biden has come a long way. He is around the same age as my father, came up in the 1940s, came of age in the 1950s. And I think that for a lot of white Americans, it was a very hostile time. And I do believe that it takes many years and decades to grow on a variety of issues. And what Vice President Biden demonstrated to me tonight was that he has a much better understanding of the systemic racism in our society and that he is willing to tackle it. And most specifically, he is willing to call it out. And that's a very uncomfortable thing to do. And he's willing to do it. And I'm very pleased that he wants to name it. And he wants to address it.
Well, I want to come to, thanks, Badine. I want to come to you, Rich, on this. You told me that you do think systemic racism is an issue in America. You think it's been an issue for a long time. President Trump was speaking to that, didn't say that directly. As a law enforcement officer, of course, you're also experiencing some of these issues in the streets. How do you think President Trump spoke about race tonight?
I think he did fairly well, but here's the thing. They brushed on this issue briefly about the talk. You know what? I have had the talk with my children. Here's the thing. Here's the thing I told my kids. Somebody with a gun tells you to do something, you do it. Notice I said someone with a gun. Be a cop or criminal, you do what they say. That'll prevent losses of life, and that'll prevent a lot of injuries. So next time you get pulled over, do what you do what the officer tells you to do. That's point one. Point two, if the officer is wrong, there's plenty of avenues to remedy that. Go to court, you sue the officer, you sue the department, you make a complaint against that officer. Right then and there is not the time to argue that. There's a reason why the names Freddie Helms and Bryant Allen aren't common like Rodney King. They were the two passengers in his vehicle. They were not beaten, they were not taken to the hospital, nothing happened. Why? Because they went along with the program. Rodney King was a parolee, drunk, fleeing from the police, and the media chose to not show the first 10 to 15 seconds where he fought the officers. If you're going to be doing all those things and fighting the officers, nothing good is going to come of that.
Rich, thank you for bringing your perspective as a law enforcement officer on that and talking about the talk. Ultimately, Dr. Jerry, I'm sure this is the talk is something you're familiar with, too. The 1984 crime bill, something that came up in the conversation that I had with you, too. So obviously, there's issues on both sides of this ticket when it comes to this. How did you feel about the conversation tonight?
Start by saying I think police brutality and inconsistent policing is a legitimate concern that Black and brown communities are facing. And there are better ways to approach policing in our communities, particularly by adopting the recommendations of that 21st century policing, community policing recommendations during the Obama and Biden administration. I think that sometimes movements like the defund the police movement is misinterpreted, when really we should be talking about how do we fund crisis intervention teams and how do we support mental health, because sometimes what we perceive as criminal activity is actually mental illness or require different types of intervention than legal intervention. And so I just think there's definitely better ways that we can be approaching this, and I think it's related to racial justice for sure.
Well, Annadelle, I want to come to you as a former law enforcement officer, someone who's married now to an undercover officer. The talk, these race issues when it comes to people walking the streets and also people in positions like you and your husband is obviously a big issue. Race is a big issue when it comes to policing. What did you hear tonight in this debate that caught your attention?
I'm Black and I'm Puerto Rican, so I'm Latina, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm a female, I have 2 young girls, and I've worked the streets. My husband is currently working the streets. His life is in danger every night now because the violence is so extreme, and that is not being addressed. And I feel that I don't want to have my kids apologize for the color of their skin. What I've learned growing up in the projects in Brooklyn, New York, is that with hard work, you could succeed in this country. America is a great country. And my girls work really hard. And because of their hard work, they will succeed. I don't ever want them to apologize. And I don't want them to think that later on, there are dark times to come because of the color of their skin.
Thank you, Annadelle, especially for that message that you're telling us about America being great, because it is true, and we've seen that on display at these debates. Different visions, but of course, we do love this country. And I want to go around real quick, because we've been through an incredible debate season. This is the last time that I'm going to be speaking to a voter panel about this. So could you tell me, and just real quick, if there was a single moment at these debates that you feel is going to have an impact on this election? And it could be any debates we've heard this entire season. Dr. Jerry, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll definitely say that, hopefully one day President Biden chose, hopefully Vice President Harris to be by his side. And so to pick a biracial, mixed race, African-American woman to stand by his side, I think says it all.
A momentous moment. Thank you for that, Dr. Jerry. Annadelle, you, a moment in this debate that's going to have an impact?
When I heard Biden say tonight that he will end the oil industry, that is very troubling. I don't know what will happen with Oklahoma, Ohio, Pennsylvania,
I hear you on that,
Texas.
Annadelle. It's definitely a big issue. Thank you for that. And Rich, how about you? A moment from these debates?
The thing that stuck with me is, yeah, Biden has had 47 years in office, and now he wants to all of a sudden change things. He's had his time. He had his chance tonight to answer, and he could not come up with very many plans.
Thank you, Rich.
I'm Latino, and I'm
an ongoing conversation on that front. And Benin, you, a single moment from these debates.
Yes, when Vice President Biden said that it wasn't about his family or President Trump's family, but it was about our families. And I think empathy
Benin,
and
it is ultimately the American family. Pardon me for cutting you off right there. Just we're running out of time. But you guys have been so great. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you at home for joining us for another civil conversation about the issues tonight and throughout this debate season. It has been a pleasure to hear directly from the voices of Southern California in this way. I hope you learned as much as I have. Of course, election season rolls on here at Spectrum News 1. Be sure to join us tomorrow night on Your Evening.